Hello, my name is Patrick Hutzler. I'm a librarian too here at the Julian Hampton Morgan Memorial Library. Today, as a special reading, we'll be reading Common Sense by Thomas Paine. I hope you enjoy. Now, let us begin. Common Sense. Of the origin and design of the government in general, with concise remarks on the English Constitution. Some writers have so confounded society with the government as to leave little or no distinction between them, whereas they are not only different, but have different origins. Society is produced by our wants, and government by our wickedness. The former promotes our happiness positively by uniting our affections, and the latter negatively by restraining our vices. The one encourages intercourse, the other creates distinction. The first is a patron, the last is a punisher. Society in every state is a blessing, but governing even in its best state is but a necessary evil. And its worst state, an intolerable one, for when we suffer or are exposed to the same miseries by a government which we might expect in a country without government, our calamity is heightened by reflecting that we furnish the means by which we suffer. Government, like dress, is the badge of lost innocence. The palace of kings are built on the ruins of the bowers of paradise. For where the impulse of the conscience clear, uniform, and irresistible obeyed, man would need no other lawgivers. But that not being the case, he finds it necessary to surrender a part of his property to furnish the means for the protection of the rest. And this he is induced to do by the same prudence which in every other case advises him out of the two evils to choose from the least. Wherefore, security being the true design in the government, it unanswerably follows that whatever form there appears most likely to ensure to us, with its least expectance and great benefit, is preferable to all others. In order to gain a clear and just idea of design of government, let us suppose a small number of persons settle in some sequestered part of the earth, unconnected from the rest. They will then represent the first peopling of any country or the world. In this state of natural liberty, society will be their first thought. A thousand motives will excite them. Thereto, the strength of one man is unequal to his wants, and his mind so unfettered for perpetual solitude that he is soon obliged to seek assistance and relief from another, who in his turn requires the same. 4 or 5 united will be able to raise tolerable dwellings in the midst of wilderness. But one man might labor out of the common period of life without accomplishing anything. When he had felled his timber, he could not remove it, nor erect it after it was removed. Hunger, in the meantime, would urge him from his work, and every different want called him in a different way. Disease, nay, even misfortune, would be death. For though neither might be mortal, yet either would disable him from living and reduce him to a state in which he might rather be said to perish than to die. Thus necessity, like a gravitating power, would soon form our newly arrived immigration to society, the reciprocal blessings of which would supersede and render the obligations of law and government unnecessary, while they remain perfectly just to each other, but as nothing but heaven's is impregnable device. It will be unavoidably happen that in proportion that they surmount the difficulties of immigration, which bound them together with a common cause, they will begin to relax in their duties and attachments to each other, and this reminiscence will point out the necessity of establishing some form of government to supply the defect of moral virtue. Some convenient tree will afford them a state house, under the branches of which the whole colony may assemble, to deliberate on the public matters. It is more than probable that their first laws will have the title of regulations and be enforced by no other penalty than public disesteem. In this first parliament, every man by natural right will have a seat. But as the colony increases, the public concern will increase likewise, and the distance with which the members may be separated will render it too inconvenient for all of them to meet on every occasion as the first. When their numbers were small, their habitations near, and the public concern few and trifling. This will point out the convenience of their consenting to leave legislative part to be managed by a select number of chosen from the whole body, who are supposed to have the same concerns at stake, which those who have appointed them, and one who will act in the manner as the whole body would act where they present. If the colony continues increasing, it will become necessary to augment the number of the representatives, and the interests of every part of the colony may be attended to. It will be found best to divide the whole into convenient parts, each part sending its proper number, and that the elected might never form to themselves an interest separate from the electors. Prudence will point out the propriety of having elections often, because of the elected might by that means return and mix again with the general body of the electors within a few months. Their fidelity to the public will be secured by the prudent reflection of not making a rod of themselves, and this frequent interchange will establish a common interest, which every part of the community they will mutually and naturally support each other, and on this, not on the unmeaning name of the king, depend on the strength of government and the happiness of the governed. Here then is the origin of the rise of government, namely a mode rendered necessary by the inability of the moral virtue to govern the world. Here too is the design of the end of government, viz. Freedom and security. And however our eyes may be dazzled with the show of our ears, deceived by sound, however prejudice may warp our wills, or interest darken our understanding, the simple voice of nature and of reason will say it is right. I draw my idea of the form of government from a principle in nature, which no art can overturn, viz. That the more simple anything is, the less liable it is to be disordered, and the easier to repair when disordered. And with this maxim in view, I offer a few remarks on the much boasted Constitution of England, that it was noble for the dark and slavish times in which it was erected is granted. When the world was overrun with tyranny, the least removed therefrom was a glorious rescue, but that is imperfect, subject to convulsion, and incapable of producing what it seems to promise, is easily demonstrated. Absolute government, though the disgrace of human nature, have this advantage with them, that they are simple. If the people suffer, they know the head from which their suffering springs. Known likewise is the remedy, and are not bewildered by a variety of causes and cures. But the Constitution of England is so exceedingly complex, the nation may suffer for years together without being able to discover in which part the fault lies. Some will say in one and some in another, and every political physician will advise a different medicine. I know it is difficult to get from our local and long-standing prejudices, yet we will suffer ourselves to examine the component parts of the English Constitution. We shall find them to be base remains of two ancient tyrannies, compounded with some new republican materials. First, the remains of the monarchical tyranny in the person of the king. Secondly, the remains of the aristocratical tyranny in the person of the peers. Thirdly, the new republican materials in the person of the commons, on whose virtue depends the freedom of England. The first two, by being hereditary, are independent of the people. Wherefore, in the constitutional sense, they contribute nothing toward the freedom of the state. To say that the Constitution of England is a union of three powers reciprocally checking each other is farcical. Either the words have no meaning, or they are flat-out contradictions. To say the comment that the check upon the king is preposterous. It proposes two things. First, the king is not to be trusted without being looked after, or, in other words, that a thirst for absolute power is a natural disease of monarchy. Secondly, the commons, by being appointed for that purpose, are either wiser or more worthy candidates than the crown. But the same constitution which gives the common a power to check the king, by withholding the supplies, gives the king the power to check the commons. By empowering him to reject other bills, it again supposes that the king is wiser than whom it is already supposed to be wiser than him. A mere absurdity. There is something exceedingly ridiculous in the composition of a monarchy. It first excludes a man from the means of information, yet empowers him to act in cases where the highest judgment is required. Say the king shuts him from the world, yet the business of the king requires him to know it thoroughly. Wherefore the different parts, by unnaturally opposing and destroying each other, prove the whole character to be absurd and useless. Some writers have explained the English Constitution thus. The king, say they, is one, the people another, the peers in a house in behalf of the king, the commons in behalf of the people. But this hath all the distinctions of a house divided against itself, and through the expression by pleasantly arranged, yet when examined they appear idle and ambiguous. It will always happen that the nicest constructions that words are capable of, when applied to description of something which either cannot exist or is too incomprehensible to be within the compass of the description, will be words of sounds only. And though they may amuse the ear, they cannot inform the mind. For the explanation includes a previous question, viz., how came the king by a power which the people are afraid to trust, and always obligated to check? Such a power cannot be the gift of a wise people, neither can any power which needs checking be from God. Yet the provisions which the Constitution makes suppose such a power to exist. But the provision is unequal to the task. The means either cannot or will not accomplish the end. And the whole affair is felo de se, for the greater weight will always carry up the less, and all the wheels of a machine are put into motion by one. It only remains to know which power in the Constitution has the most weight, for that will govern, and though the other or part of them may clog, or as the phrase is, check the rapidity of the motion, yet so long as they cannot stop it, their endeavors will be ineffectual. The first moving power will at last have its way, and what it wants in speed it supplies by time. That the crown and the overbearing part of the English Constitution needs to be mentioned, that it derives its whole consequences merely from being the giver of places and pensions is self-evident. Therefore we have been wise enough to shut and lock doors against absolute monarchies. We, at the same time, have been foolish enough to put in the crown in possession of the key. A monarchy and hereditary succession. Mankind. Being originally equal in the orders of creation, the equality can only be destroyed by some subsequent circumstance. The distinction of rich and poor may in great measure be accounted for, without having resources, the harsh, ill-sounding names of possession and avarice. Oppression is often the consequences, but seldom or never the means, of riches. And though avarice will preserve a man from being necessitously poor, it generally makes him too timorous to be wealthy. there is another and greater distinction for which no truly natural or religious reason can be assigned. That is the distinction of men into kings and subjects. Male and female are distinctions of nature, good and bad, distinction of heaven. But now a race of men came into the world, so exalted above the rest, and distinguished like some new species. It is worth inquiring into whether they are the means of happiness or misery of mankind. In the early ages of the world, according to the scriptures, chronologically, there were no kings, the consequence of which was there were no wars. It is the pride of kings that which throws mankind into confusion. Holland, without a king, hath enjoyed more peace in this last century than any of the monarchical governments in Europe. Antiquity favors the same remarks for the quiet and rural lives of the first patriarchs hath the happy something in them, which vanishes away when they come to the history of the Jewish royalty. Government by kings was first introduced in this world by the heathens, from whom the children of Israel copied the custom. They are the most prosperous invention of the devil ever set on foot. For the promotion of idolatry, the heathens paid divine honors to their descendant kings, and the Christian world hath improved on them by doing the same of their living ones. How impious is the title of sacred majesty applied to a worm, who in the midst of his splendor is crumbling into dust. As exalting one man so greatly above the rest cannot be justified on the equal rights of nature, so neither can it be defended on the authority of Scripture, for the wills of the Almighty, as declared by Gideon and the prophet Samuel, expressingly disapproves the governments by kings. All anti-monarchical parts of Scripture have been very smoothly glossed over in monarchical governments, but they undoubtedly merit the attention of the countries which have their governments yet to form. Render unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, is Scripture doctrine of courts. It is in no support of monarchical governments, for the Jews at the time were without a king, and in a state of vassalage to the Romans. Near 3,000 years passed away from the Mosaic accounts of the creation, till the Jews, under the national delusion, requested a king. Till then their form of government, except in the extraordinary cases where the Almighty interposed, was a kind of republic administered by a judge, and the elders of the tribes. Kings they had none, and was held as sinful so acknowledged any being under that title but the Lord of hosts. When a man seriously reflects on the idolatrous homage which is paid to the person of the king, he needs not wonder that the Almighty, ever jealous of his honor, should disapprove of a form of government which so impiously invades the prerogative of heaven. Monarchy is ranked in Scripture as one of the sins of the Jews, which a curse is reserved and denounced against them. The history of that transaction is worth attending to. The children of the Israelites being oppressed by the Midianites, Gideon marched against them with a small army, and victory through the divine interposition decided in his favor. The Jews elate in their success, and attributed to the generalship of Gideon, proposed making him a king, saying, "Rule thou over us, thou and thy son and thy son's son." Here was temptation, but Gideon, in the piety of his soul, replied, I will not rule over you, neither shall my sons rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. Words need not be more explicit. Gideon doth not decline the honor, but denied the right to give it. Neither doth he compliment with them invented declarations of his thanks, but in the positive style of the prophet charges with them the dissatisfaction of their proper sovereign than the King of heaven. About 31 years after this, they fell again into the same error. The hankering which the Jews had for idolatrous customs of the heathens something exceedingly uncountable. But so it was, that laying hold of the misconduct of Samuel's 2 sons who were entrusted with some secular concerns, they came in abrupt and clamorous manner to Samuel, saying, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in the way. Now make us a king to judge us like all the other nations. And here we cannot but observe that their motives were bad, viz., that they might be like unto other nations, i.e., the heathens, where their true glory laid in being as much unlike them as possible. But things displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord, and the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto their voice of the people, and all they have said unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them, according to all the works which they have done to this day. I brought them up out of Egypt, and even unto the day where they have forsaken me, and served other gods, so do they also unto thee. Now henceforth hearken unto their voice. Howbeit protest solemnly unto them, and show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them, i.e., not any particular king, but the general manner of the kings of the earth, whom Israel was so willing to copy after. And notwithstanding the great distance of time and difference of manner, all characters is still fashioned. Samuel told all the words of the Lord unto the people, and asked of him a king. And he said, This shall be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them himself for his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and some shall run before his chariot. This description agrees with the present mode of impressing men. And he will appoint his captains over thousands and captains over 50s, and will set them to ear his ground and reap his harvest, and to make his instruments of war and instruments of his chariots. And he will take your daughters to be his confectionaries, and to be cooks, and to be bakers. This describes the experience and luxury as well as the oppression of the kings. He will take your fields and your olive yards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. And he will take the tenth of your feed and of your vineyard, and give them to his officers and to his servants. And by which we see that the bribery, encryption, and favoritism are the standing vices of the king. And he will take the tenth of your men servants, and your maid servants, and your goodest young men, and your asses, and put them to his work. And he will take the tenth of your sheep, and ye shall be his servant, and ye shall cry out in that day with your king, which ye shall have chosen, and the Lord will not hear you in that day. This accounts for the continuation of the monarchy. Neither do the characters of the few good kings that live since neither signify the title or blot out the sinfulness of the origin. And the high encomium given to David takes no notice of him officially as king, but only of the man after God's own heart. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, Nay, but we will have a king over us, and that we may be like all the other nations, that our king may judge us, and go out before us, and fight our battles. Samuel continued to reason with them, but to no purpose. He set before them their ingratitude, but all would not avail, and seeing them fully bent on their folly, he cried out, I will call unto the Lord, and he shall send thunder and rain, which then was punishment, being in the time of wheat harvest, that ye may perceive and see that your wickedness is great, which ye had done in the sight of the Lord, in asking you a king. So Samuel called unto the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day. And all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. And all the people said unto Samuel, Pray for thy servants unto the Lord thy God, that we die not for. We have added unto our sins this evil to ask a king. These portions of Scriptures are direct and positive. They meant no equivocal construction of the Almighty hath here entered his protest against a monarchical government is true, or the Scripture is false, and a man hath good reason to believe that there is as much of kingcraft as priestcraft, and withholding the Scriptures from the public in the popish countries, where monarchy in every instance is the property of the government. To the evil of monarchy we add that of heredity, succession, and the first delegation of and lessening of ourselves, so the second claimed as the matter of right, is an insult and an imposition on propriety. For all men being originally equal, no one by birth could have the right to set up his own family and perpetual preference to all others forever, and though he himself might deserve some decent degree of honors of his competence, yet his descendants might be far too unworthy to inherit them. One of the strongest natural proofs of the folly of heredity, the right of kings, is that the nature disproves it otherwise. She would not be so frequently turned into ridicule by giving mankind an ass for a lion. Secondly, as no man at first could possess any other public honors than were bestowed upon him, so where the givers of those honors could have no powers to give away the right of property. And though they might say, we chose you for our head, they could not, without manifest injustice to their children, say, that our children and your children and your children shall reign over ours forever. Because such an unwise, unjust, unnatural compact might, perhaps, in the next succession put them under the government of a rogue or a fool. Most wise men in their private sentiments have ever treated hereditary rights with contempt. Yet it is one of those evils which, when once established, is not easily removed. Many submit from fear, others from superstition, and more powerful parts share with the king the plunder of the rest. This is supposing to the present race of kings of the world to have an honorable origin, whereas it is more than probable that we could take off the dark covering of antiquity and trace them in their first rise, that we should find that the first of them nothing better than a principal ruffian of some restless gang whose savage manners or preeminence in the subtlety increasing in power and expanding in depredations, overawed the quiet and defenseless to purchase their safety by frequent contributions. Yet his electors could have no idea of giving hereditary rights to his descendants, because such a perpetual exclusion of themselves was incompatible with the free and unrestrained principles they possessed to live by. Wherefore hereditary succession in the early ages of monarchy cannot take place as a matter of claim, but as something casual or complemental. But as few or no records were extant in those days of the traditionary history stuffed with fables, it was very easy, after the lapse of a few generations, to trump up some superstitious tale, conveniently time Mahomet like to cram hereditary rights down the throats of the vulgar. Perhaps the disorder which threatened or seemed to threaten on the decease of a leader and the choice of a new one. For elections among ruffians could not be very orderly, induced many at first to favor hereditary pretensions, by which means it happens as it hath happened since, that what at first was submitted to as convenience was afterwards claimed as a right. England, since the conquest, hath known for some good monarchs, but grown beneath much larger number of bad ones. Yet no man his sense can say that their claim under William the Conqueror is very an honorable one. A French bastard landing with an armed banditti and establishing himself king of England against the consent The native is in plain terms a very paltry, rascally original. It certainly hath no divinity in it. However, it is regardless to spend much time in explaining the folly of hereditary rights. If there are any so weak as to believe it, let them promiscuously worship the ass and lion, and welcome. I shall neither copy their humiliation nor disturb their devotion. Yet, I should be glad to ask how they suppose kings came at first. The question admits but three answers, viz., either by lot, by election, or by usurpation. If the first king was taken by lot, it establishes a precedent for the next, which excludes hereditary succession. Saul was by lot. Yet the succession was not hereditary. Neither does it appear that the transaction where there was any intention it ever should. If the first king of any country was by election, that likewise establishes a precedent for the next to say that the right of all future generations is taken away by the act of the first elector. And their choice not only of a king, but of a family of kings, ever hath no parallel in or out of Scripture, but the doctrine of original sin, which was the free will of all men lost in Adam, and from which such compromises and will admit of no other hereditary succession can derive no glory, for as in Adam all sinned, and as in the first electors all men obeyed. As in one all mankind were subject to Satan, and in the other to sovereignty, as our innocence was lost in the first, and our authority in the last, and as both disabled us from resuming some former state of privilege, it unanswerably follows that the original sin and hereditary succession are parallels, dishonorable rank, and glorious connections. Yet the most subtle sophist cannot produce a juster smile. At the usurpation, no man will be so hardly as to defend it. And that William the Conqueror was an usurper is a fact not to be contradicted. The plain truth is that the antiquity of English monarchs will not bear looking into. But it is not so much the absurdity as the evils of hereditary succession which concerns mankind. To ensure a race of good and wise men, it would have sealed of divine authority, but it opens the door to the foolish and the wicked and the improper. It hath in the nature of oppression men who looked upon themselves born to reign and others to obey, soon grow insolent, select from the rest of mankind. Their minds are easily poisoned by the importance of the world they act in, but little opportunity of knowing its true interests. When they succeed to the government, are frequently the most ignorant and unfit of any throughout the dominions. Another evil which attends hereditary succession is that which time the regency acting under the cover of the king have every opportunity and inducement to betray their trust. The same national misfortune happens when a king worn out with age and infirmity enters the last stage of human weakness. In both cases, the public becomes a prey to every miscreant who can tamper successfully with the follies of either age or infancy. The most plausible plea which hath ever been offered in favor of hereditary succession is that it preserved the nation for civil war. And were this true, it would be weighty, whereas it is the most barefaced falsity ever imposed upon mankind. The whole history of England disowns the fact. 30 kings and 2 minors have reigned in that distracted kingdom since the conquest, in which time there have been, including the Revolution, no less than 8 civil wars and 19 rebellions. Therefore, instead of making a for peace, it makes against it and destroys the very foundation it seems to stand on. The contest for monarchy and succession between the House of York and Lancaster laid England in a sense of blood for many years. 12 pitched battles, beside the skirmishes and sieges, were fought between Henry and Edward. Twice was Henry prisoner to Edward, who in his turn was prisoner to Henry. And so uncertain is the fate of war and the tempers of a nation, when nothing but personal matters are the grounds of a quarrel, that Henry was taken in triumph from prison to a palace, and Edward obliged to fly from a palace to a foreign land. Yes, sudden as transition of tempers are seldom lasting. Henry, in his turn, was driven from the throne, and Edward recalled to succeed him, the Parliament always following the strongest side. This contest began in the reign of Henry VI. It was not entirely extinguished till Henry VII, and whom the families were united, including a period of 67 years, viz., from 1422 to 1489. In short, monarchy and succession have laid not this or that kingdom only, but the world in blood and ashes, till the form of government, which the word of God bears testimony against the blood, will attend it. We inquire into the business of a king, we shall find that in some countries they have none, and after sauntering away their lives without pleasure to themselves or advantage to the nation, withdraw from the scene and leave their successors to thread the same idle round. In absolute monarchies, the whole weight of business, civil and military, lies on the king. The children of Israel, in their request for a king, urged to his plea that he may judge us and go before us and fight our battles. But in a country where he is neither a judge nor a general, as in England, a man would be puzzled to know what is his business. The nearer any government approaches to a republic, the less business there is for a king. It is somewhat difficult to find a proper name for the government of England. Sir William Meredith calls it a republic, but in its present state is unworthy of the name, because the corrupt influence of the crown, by having all the palaces in its disposal, has so effectually swallowed up the power and eaten out the virtue of the House of Commons, the Republican part of it in the Constitution. The government of England is nearly as monarchical as that of France or Spain. Men fall out with the names without understanding them. For the Republican, not the monarchical parties of the Constitution of England, which English men glory in, viz., the liberty of choosing in the House of Commons from out of their own body. And it's easy to see that when Republican virtue fails, slavery ensues, which is the Constitution of England, sickly. But because the monarch hath poisoned the republic, the crown has engrossed the commons. In England, a king hath little more to do than make war and give ways to places, which in plain terms is to impoverish the nation and set it together to be by the ears, and petty business. Indeed, for a man to be allowed 800,000 sterlings a year for and worshipped into the bargain, of more worth is one honest man to society and in the sight of God than all the crowned ruffians that have ever lived. Thoughts on the present state of the American affairs. In the following pages I offer nothing more than simple facts, plain arguments, and common sense. I have no other preliminaries to settle with the readers. That he will have to divest himself of prejudice and possession and suffer his reason and his feeling to determine for himself that he will put on rather than he will not put off the true character of a man, and generously enlarge his views beyond the present day. Volumes have been written on the subject of the struggle between England and America. Men of all ranks embarked in the controversy from different motives, with various designs, but all have been ineffectual, and the period of debate is close. Arms, as the last resource decided to contest, the appeal of the choice of the king, and the continent hath accepted the challenge. It had been reported of the late Mr. Pelham, who, though an able minister, was not without his faults, that on his being attacked in the House of Commons, on the score that his measures were only temporary kind, replied, "They will last my time." Should, as though thought so fatal and unmanly possess the colonies in the present contest, the name of ancestors will be remembered by future generations with detestation. The sun never shine on a cause of greater worth. 'Tis not a affair of a city, a country, province, or kingdom, but of a continent, or at least 1/8 part of the habitable globe. It is not the concern of a day, a year, or an age. Posterity are virtually involved in the contest and will be more or less affected, even to the end of the time, by the proceedings now. Now is the seed of time of continental union, faith, and honor. The least fracture now will be like a name engraved by the point of a pen in the tender rind of a young oak. The wound will enlarge with the tree, and the prosperity read in full-grown characters. By referring to the matter from arguments to arm, a new era of politics is struck. A new method of thinking has arisen. All plans, proposals, and prior to the 19th of April, i.e., the commencement of hostilities, are like almanacs of the last year, which thought proper when then are superseded on either side of the question, then terminating in one of the same points, viz., a union with Great Britain. The only difference between the parties was the method of effecting it, the one proposing force and the other friendship. But it hath so far happened that the first hath failed, and the second hath withdrawn her influence. As much hath been said of the advantages of reconciliation, which like an agreeable dream hath passed away and left us, as we were. It is but right that we should examine the contrary side of the argument, and inquire into some of the many material injuries that the colonies sustain, and always will sustain, by being connected to the dependent on Great Britain. To examine the connection and dependence on the principle of the nature and common sense that we have to trust to if separated, and that we are to no exception if dependent. I have heard it asserted by some that America hath flourished under her former connection with Great Britain. That same connection is necessary towards her future happiness, and will always have the same effect. Nothing can be more fallacious than this kind of argument. We may as well assert that because a child has thrived upon milk, it is never to have meat. Or now that the first 20 years of our lives is to become a president for the next 20. Even this is many more than is true. For I answer roundly that America hath flourished as much, and as probably much more, had no European power had anything to do with her. The commons by which she hath enriched herself are the necessities of life, and always have a market while eating is the custom of Europe. But she hath protected us, to say some. That she hath engrossed us is true, and defended the continent at our expense as well as her own is admitted that she would have defended Turkey from the same motive, viz., the sake of trade and dominion. Alas, we have been long led away by ancient prejudices and made large sacrifices to superstition. We have boasted the protection of Great Britain without considering her motive. Was interest not attachment? Or does she not protect us from our enemies on our own account, but from her enemies on her own account? From those who hath no quarrel with us on any other account, and those who will always be with our enemies on the same account. The Britain waive her preposition on the continent, or the continent throw off the dependence, and we should be at peace with France and Spain. Where they were at war with Britain, the miseries of Hanover last war ought to warn against the connections. It hath lately been asserted in Parliament that the colonies have no relation to each other, but through a parent country, i.e., that Pennsylvania and the Jerseys have, and so on from the rest of our sister colonies by the way of England. It is certainly a very round way of proving relationship, but it is the nearest and only true way of proving enemyship. If I may so call it, France and Spain never were, nor perhaps ever will be, our great enemies as Americans, but as being the subjects of Great Britain. But Britain is the parent country, some say, and the more shame upon her conduct. Even brutes do not devour their young, nor savages make war upon their families. Wherefore this assertion, if true, turn to her approach. But if it happens not to be true, or only partially so, and the phrase parent or mother country hath been Jesuitically adopted by the king and his parasites, with low papistical design of gaining an unfair bias on the credulence of weakness of our minds. Europe and not England is our parent country of America. This new world hath been an asylum for the persecuted, lover of civil and religious liberty from every part of Europe. Hither have they fled, not from the tender embraces of the mother, but from the cruelty of the monster. And it is so far true of England. The same tyranny which drove the first immigrant from home pursues their descendants still. In the extensive quarter of the globe, we forget the narrow limits of 360 miles, that of the extent of England. And we carry our friendship on a larger scale. We claim brotherhood with every European Christian, and triumph in the generosity of the sentiment. It is pleasant to observe that by what gradations we surmount the forces of local prejudice, as we enlarge our acquaintance with the world. A man born in any town in England, fellow parishioners, because of their interest in many cases, will be common, and distinguished him by the name of neighbor. If he meets him but a few miles from home, he drops the narrow idea of a street and salutes him by the name of townsman. He travels out of the country, he meets him in any other case. He forgets the minor division of street and town and calls him countryman, i.e., countryman. But if their foreign excursions they should associate in France or any other part of Europe, their local embrace will be enlarged into that of Englishmen. Just by a party of reasoning, all Europeans meet in America, or any other quarter of the globe, are countrymen, for England, Holland, Germany, and Sweden, when compared with the whole, stand in the same place on the larger scale, which the division of street and town and country do on the smaller ones. The distinction is too limited for continental minds. Not 1/3 of the inhabitants, even their products, are of English descent. Wherefore I reprobate the phrase of parent or mother country, applied to England only being false, selfish, and narrow, and ungenerous. But admitting that we're all of English descent, and that doesn't know, and what does it amount to? Nothing. Britain being now an open enemy extinguishes every other name and title. And I say that reconciliation as our duty is truly farcical. The first king of England and of the present line, William the Conqueror, was a Frenchman, and half the peers of England are descendants from the same country. Wherefore, from the same method of reasoning, England sought to be governed by France. Much hath been said of the United States strength of Britain and the colonies, that in conjunction they might bid defiance to the world. But this is mere presumption. The fate of war is uncertain. Neither do the expressions mean anything, for this continent would never suffer itself to be drained of inhabitants and support the British arms in either East Asia, Africa, or Europe. Besides, what have we to do with setting up the world at defiance? Our plan is commerce, and that will attend to. Will secure us peace and friendship of all Europe, because it is in the interest of all of Europe to have America a free port. Her trade will always be a protection. Her barrenness of gold and silver secure her from invaders. I challenge the warmest advocates of reconciliation to shew a single advantage that this continent can reap. By being connected to the Great Britain, I repeat the challenge not a single advantage is derived. Our corn will fetch its price in any market in Europe, and our imported goods must be paid for by them where we will. But the injuries of the disadvantages we sustain by the connections are without number, and our duty to mankind at large, as well as to ourselves, instructs us to renounce the allegiance. Yet any submission to or dependence on Great Britain tends directly to involve the continent European wars and quarrels, and set up at variance with nations who would otherwise seek our friendship, and against whom we would otherwise we have neither anger nor complaint. As Europe is our market for trade, we ought to form no partial connections with any part of it. But the true interest of America to steer clear of European connections, which she can never do while being dependent on Britain. She is made of the make weight in the scale of British politics. English is too thickly planted with kingdoms to be long at peace. And whenever war breaks out between England and any foreign power, the trade of America goes to ruin because of her connection with Britain. The next war may not turn out like the last, and should not the advocates for reconciliation will now be wishing for separation, then because neutrality in that case would be a safer convoy than a man of war. Everything that is plain or natural pleads for separation. The blood of the slain, the weeping voices of nature cries, "'Tis time to part!" Even the distance which the Almighty hath placed England and America is a strong natural proof that the authority of one over the other was never design of heaven. The time likewise at which the continent was discovered adds weight to this argument, and the manner in which it was peopled increased the force of it. The Reformation was preceded by the discovery of America, and that the Almighty graciously meant to open a sanctuary to the persecuted in the future years, when home should afford neither friendship nor safety. The authority of Great Britain over this continent is a form of government which sooner or later must have an end, and a serious mind can draw no true pleasure by looking forward under the painful and positive conviction that what he calls the present Constitution is merely temporary. As parents, we can have no joy knowing that this government is not sufficient, lasting to ensure anything which we may bequeath to posterity. And by plain method of argument, as we are running the next generation to debt, we ought to do the work of it. Otherwise, we use them meanly and pitifully, and in order to discover the line of our duty rightly. We should take our children in hand and fix our station a few years farther into life, that eminence will be present and prospect, which a few present fears and prejudice conceals from our sight. Though I would carefully avoid any unnecessary offense, yet I am inclined to believe that all those who espouse the doctrine of reconciliation may be included within the following description: interested men who are not to be trusted, weak men who cannot see, the prejudiced men who will not see, and a certain set of moderate men who think better of European world than it deserves. And this last class, by an ill-judged deliberation, will be the cause of more calamity to this continent than all the other three. It is the good fortune of many to live distant from the scene of sorrow, the evil, if not sufficiently brought to their door to make them feel the precariousness of which all Americans' property is possessed. But let our imagination transport us for a few moments to Boston. The sea of righteousness will teach us wisdom, and instruct us forever to renounce the power in which we can have no trust. The inhabitants of that unfortunate city, who but a few months ago were in ease and affluent, have now no other alternative than to stay and starve, or turn out to beg, endangered by fire of their friends if they continue within the city, and plundered by the soldiery if they leave it. In their present condition, they are prisoners without the hope of redemption, and in general attack for their relief, they will be exposed to the fury of both armies. Men of passive temper look somewhat lightly over the offense of Britain, and still hoping for the best, are apt to call out, "Come, come, we shall be friends again, for all this." But examine the passionate feelings of mankind. Bring the doctrine of reconciliation to the touchstone of nature, and then tell me whether you can hereafter love, honor, and faithfully serve the power that hath carried fire and sword into your land. If you cannot do all these, then you are only deceiving yourself, and by your delay bring ruin upon prosperity. Your future connection with Britain, whom can neither love nor honor, will be forced and unnatural, and being formed only of the plan and present convenience, will in a little time fall into relapse, more wretched than the first. But if you say that you can still pass the violations over, then I ask, hath your house been burnt? Hath your property been destroyed? Before your face? Are your wife and children destitute of bed to lie on, or bread to live on? Have you lost a parent or child by their hand, and yourself the ruined and wretched survivor? If you have not, then you are not a judge of those who have. But if you have, you can still shake the hand with the murderers. Then you are unworthy of the name of husband, friend, father, or lover. And whatever may be your rank or title in life, you have the heart of a coward and the spirit of a sycophant. This is not inflaming or exaggerating matters, but trying them by those feelings and affections which nature justifies, and without which we should be incapable of discharging the social duties of life, or enjoying the felicities of it. I mean not to exhibit horror for the purpose of provoking revenge, but awakening us from the fatal and unmanly slumber, that we may pursue determinately some fixed object. It is not in the power of the Britons or of Europe to conquer America, if she does not conquer herself by delay and timidity. The present winter is worth an age, if rightly employed, but if lost or neglected, the whole continent will partake in this fortune. There is no punishment which that man would not deserve, but he who, or what, or where he will. That may be means of sacrificing a season so precious and useful. It is repugnant to reason and the universal order of things, so all examples from former ages to suppose that this continent can no longer remain subject to external powers. The most sanguine in Britain do not think so. The utmost stretch of human wisdom cannot at this time compass a plan short of separation that can promise the continent even a year's security. Reconciliation is now a fallacious dream. Nature hath deserted the connection, and art cannot supply her place, for it is Milton widely expressed, never can truly reconcilement grow where wounds of deadly heat have pierced so deep. Every quiet method for peace hath been ineffectual. Our prayers have been rejected with disdain, and only tended to convincing us that nothing flatters vanity or confirms obstinity in kings more than repeated petitioning. And nothing hath contributed more than the very measures to make the kings of Europe absolute. Witness Denmark and Sweden. Wherefore, since nothing but blows will do for God's sake, let us come to a final separation, and not leave the next generation to be cutting throats under the violation of unmeaning names of parent and child. To say they will never attempt it again is idle and visionary. We thought so at the repeal of the Stamp Act, yet a year or two undeceived us. As well may we suppose the nation which hath been once defeated will never renew the quarrel. As to government matters, it is not the power of Britain to do this continent justice. The business of it will soon be to weigh and intricate to be managed, to be with any tolerable degree of convenience, by power so distant from us, and so very ignorant of us. For if they cannot conquer us, they cannot govern us. To be always running 3,000 or 4,000 miles with a fate of miles with a tale or a petition wanting 4 or 5 months for an answer which, when obtained, requires 5 or 6 more to explain in it, will in a few years be looked upon as folly and childishness. There was a time when it was proper, and there is a proper time for it to cease. Small islands not capable of protecting themselves are the proper objects for kingdoms to take under their care. But there is something very absurd in supposing a continent to be perpetually governed by an island. In no instance hath nature made a satellite larger than its primary planet. And as England and America, with respect to each other, reverse the common order of nature, it's evident they belong to different systems, England to Europe, America to itself. I am not included by motives of pride, or party, or resentment to espouse the doctrine of separation and independence. I am clearly, positively, and consciously persuaded that it is of that mere patchwork that it can afford no lasting felicity. That it is leaving the sword to our children and shrinking back at a time when little more and little farther would have rendered this continent the glory of the earth. As Britain hath not manifested the last inclination towards a compromise, we may be sure that no terms can be obtained worthy of the acceptance of the continent, or any way to equal the expense of blood and treasure we will have been already put to. The object extended for always to bear some of the just portion to the expense. The removal of the North or the whole detestable junto is a matter unworthy of millions we have expended. A temporary stoppage of trade was inconvenience, which would have sufficiently balanced the repeal of all the acts complained of, had such a repeal been obtained. But the whole continent must take up arms. If every man must be a soldier, it is scarcely worth our while to fight against the contemptibility. Ministry only, dearly, dearly do we pay for the repeal of the acts. If that is all we fight for in the just estimation is the great folly to pay Bunker Hill price for law as for land. As I have always considered the independence of this continent as an event which sooner or later must arrive, so from the late rapid progress of the continent to maturity, the event could not be far off. Wherefore, on the breaking out of hostilities, it was not worth the while to have disputes a matter which time would have finally redressed, unless we meant to be in earnest. Otherwise, it was like wasting and a state on a suit at law to regulate the trespass of tenants whose lease is just expiring. No man was a warmer wisher for reconciliation than myself, but before the fatal 19th of April, 1775, which is also known as the Massacre at Lexington. But the moment the event of that day was made known, I rejected the hard and silly-tempered Pharaoh of England forever, the disdain of the wretched that which pretended the title of father of his people, can unfeelingly hear of their slaughter, and composedly sleep with their blood upon his soul. But admitting that matters were not made up, that would be an event. I answer the ruin of the continent, and that for several reasons. First, the powers governing still remain in the hands of the kings. He will have negative over the legislation of the continent. He has shown himself such an irreverent enemy of liberty, and discovered that such a thirst for arbitrary power. Is he, or is he not, a proper man to say these colonies, "You shall make no law but what I please"? And is there an inhabitation in America so ignorant as to not know what, according to what is called the present Constitution, that its constituent can make no law but the king gives leave to, and there is no man so unwise as not to see, concerning what has happened, he will suffer no law to be made here, but as such suits his purpose. We may be affectionately enslaved by the wants of the laws of America, as by submitting the laws made for us in England. As matters are made up, as it is called, there can be any doubt, but the whole power of the crown will be exerted to keep this continent as low and humble as possible. Instead of going forward, we shall go backwards, or be perpetually quarreling and ridiculously petitioning. We are already greater than the king wishes us to be, and will he not hereafter endeavor to make us less? To bring the matter to one point, is the power who is jealous of our prosperity, a proper power to govern us. Whoever says no to this question is an independent, for independency means no more than whether then we shall make our own laws, and to whether the king, the greatest enemy of the continent, hath, or can have, shall tell us, there shall be no laws but such as I like. The king will say, distinction, there can be no superiority. Perfect. The king will say, have a negative temptation. The people there can make no laws without his consent. And we may say right in good order. There is something very ridiculous. Holland and Switzerland are without wars. The 21, foreign or domestic, which has often happened, shall say to several million government, it is true, are never wiser than themselves. The crown itself, I forbid this or that act of yours at home to be law. And that degree of pride, in this place I decline this sort of reply. Ever attend on regal I will never cease to expose the absurdity into a rupture with and the only answer powers. That England being an instance where a Republican government not, by being formed on more natural principles, another would negotiate quite another case. The king's negative here. If there's any 10 times more dangerous and fatal than it can be in England. For there he will scarcely refuse his consent. Men do not see their way out a strong state of defense. Therefore, as an opening in America, he would never suffer that business. I offer the following hints. America's only secondary object. At the same time, modestly affirming that I have no other opinion of them myself. Consult to the good of this country no farther than into giving rights answers for her own purpose. Could the striding thoughts of individuals for her own interest leads her to suppress the growth of frequently foreign case materials as wise does not promote men to her advantage or in the least matters interferes with it. Let the assemblies be annual under such a second-hand government only. The representation more considering equal. That what has happened, their business wholly domestic, change from enemies to friends by the alteration of the authority of the Continental Congress. In order to shew that reconciliation each now is a dangerous divided into 6, 8, I affirm that would be policy in the districts at this time Each
to
repeal
repeal
this
the
act for the
a
sake of
proper number
reinstating himself
of
in the
delegates
government
to Congress
of the provinces,
that each colony, in order that he may
send at
accomplish
least
it by craft and subtlety,
may send at least 30. The
no
whole
longer,
number in
and
the
he cannot do
Congress
by force and
will
violence
be
in
at
the
least
short
390.
Each reconciliation and
Congress
ruin
will
are nearly related.
Congress to sit.
And choose
Secondly,
a president by the
that as
following
even
methods.
the best terms which can,
When the delegates are
we can
met, let a
expect to
colony be
obtain
taken
amount to
from
no more
the
than
whole 13 colonies,
temporary
by lot.
expedient or kind of government
which
by
let
guardianship, which can last
whole
no longer
Congress choose
until
by
the
ballot
colonies
a
come of
president
age.
from out of
The
the
general
delegates
face
of that
and the
province.
state of things in the interim will be
The
unsettled.
next Congress, let a colony be
Immigrants
taken
of poverty will
by
not
lot from the
choose
12
to come
only,
to a
omitting
country
the
whose
colony from
form
which
of
the
government
president was
hangs by
taken
a
from
thread,
the former Congress.
and who every
And so
day
the proceeding on to the whole
tottering on the
13
brink of
have
commotion,
had their
and
proper
the disturbance and
rotation,
numbers of the present inhabitants,
in order that nothing may
lay
pass
hold
into
of the
a law
interval to dispose of their
what is
effects and
satisfactorily
continent.
just. Not less than 3/5 of the
The
Congress
powerful
to
of
call
all
it
arguments
majority.
is that nothing but independence, i.e.,
He that will promote
continental
discord
form of
under a government so eagerly formed as this
can keep the peace of
would
the
have
continent,
joined
and
Lucifer in his
preserve,
revolt.
if
But
inviolate
either with
from
particular
civil war.
delicacy from who or in
I dread
what
the event
manner
of
this business
reconciliation with Britain,
first
now,
arise,
as it is more than probable that will be followed
as
by
it
a
seems
revolt
most
somewhere or other,
agreeable and consistent
the
that it should come from
consequences of
some
which may be
intermediate
far
body
more
between
fatal
the government
than the malice
and
of
the
Britain.
governors.
Thousands
That
are already
is,
ruined
between
by
Congress
British
and the people.
barbarity.
A continental conference
Thousands
be
more
held.
will probably suffer the same fate.
And the following manners.
Those men have
for
other
the
feelings
following
than us,
purpose.
who have nothing suffered.
All they
now possess
26
liberty
members of Congress, viz.
that they before enjoyed a sacrifice to a
Two for
service,
each colony,
and having nothing
members
more
for
to
each
lose,
house.
they
And
disdain
assemble
submission besides.
people at large be chosen
The general
in the
temper of the
city or
colonies
town.
towards a British government
With many qualified voters.
relates that of a youth who is nearly out of his time.
I shall think
They
proper to
care
attend
very little
from
about
all
her.
parts of the province for that purpose,
And a government
or
which
if
cannot
more
preserve
convenient,
the peace.
the representative may be
There's
chosen
no government
in
at
2
all.
or
And
3
in that case, we pay our money for
the most
nothing.
popular parts thereof.
We
And this
pray that
conference
is
thus
Britain
assembled
can do,
under
what
the
it
2
is
grand
Britain
principles
can
of
do.
business, knowledge
Whose
and
power be wholly on paper, should a civil tumult
The members
break
of
out
Congress
the very day
assemblies
after
and conventions.
reconciliation.
By
I have
having
heard
had
some men say, many of whom I believe
national
spoke
concerns,
without thinking,
will be
they
able
dreaded
and useful
independence,
counselors,
bring you a
the whole being
bring civil
empowered
wars.
by the people.
It is but seldom that our first thoughts are truly correct.
The
And
converting
that is the
members
case
shall be
here,
met
for
in
there
their
are
business
10
to frame a
times
continental
more
charter,
to dread from a patched up
or a
connection
charter of the United Colonies,
than from independence.
answering to what is called
I
the
make
Magna Carta of England.
the sufferer's case my own, and I protest
Fixing the
the
number
number
of
of
manners
members
of
my
choosing
house,
members of
home,
Congress,
my property
members
destroyed,
of the Assembly,
and my circumstances
for their
ruined.
date,
That is a man's
sitting,
sensible
and
injuries.
drawing lines of business.
I could never relish the doctrine of
and
another
jurisdiction between them.
reconciliation, or
Always
consider
remembering
myself
that our
bound
strength
thereby.
is continental, not provincial.
The colonies have manifested such a spirit of good order and obedience to the continental
Securing
government,
freedom and property to
as
all
is
men, and
sufficient
above
to make
all
every
things,
man,
the
every
free
reasonable
exercise of
person
religion,
easy and happy.
according to the
On that
dictates
head,
of
no man
conscience,
can assign
with such
the
other
least
matters
pretense for his
as
fears
necessary
on
for
any
charter
other
to
ground.
contain. Immediately
Such are
after
truly childish and ridiculous.
which the said conference dissolve,
that one
and
colony
the
will be
bodies which shall be
striving for
chosen
superiority
comfortable
over
as said
another.
charter, shall be the legislator and governors of this continent for the time being, whose peace and happiness may God preserve. Amen. Should any body of men be hereafter delegated for this or similar purpose, I offer them the following extracts. Following extracts from the wise observer on governance. Dragonetti, the science, says he, of politicians consists of fixing the true point of happiness and freedom. Those men would deserve the gratitude of ages, who should discover a mode of government that contained the greatest sum of individual happiness, with the least national expense. Dragonetti on virtue and rewards. But where some say is king of America, I'll tell you, friend, he reigns above, and doth not make havoc of mankind like the royal brood of Britain. Yet that we may not appear so defective even in earthly honors, let a day be solemnly set apart Proclaiming the charter, let it be brought forth, placed on the divine law, the word of God. Let a crown be placed thereon, by which the world may know that so far we approve of monarchy, that in America the law is king. For as an absolute government, the king is law. So in free country, the law ought to be king, and there ought to be no other. Lest any ill use should afterwards arise, the crown at the conclusion of the ceremony be demolished and scattered among the people, whose right it is. A government of our own is a natural right. For when a man seriously reflects on the precariousness of human affairs, he will become convinced that it is wiser and safer to form a constitution of our own in a cooler, deliberate manner. What we have it in our power than to trust such interesting events to time and chance. We admit it now. Some, Thomas Anello, otherwise Marcel, a fisherman of Naples, who after sprinting up his countrymen in the public marketplace, again the oppression of the Spaniards, to whom the place and then subject promoted to them to the revolt, in the space of the day became king. Massanello may hereafter arise, who, laying hold of the popular disquietudes, may collect together the desperate and the discontented, and by assuming themselves the power of government, may sweep away the liberties of the continent like a deluge. Should the government of America return again to the hands of Britain, the tottering situation of things will be a temptation for some desperate adventurer to try for his tune, and in such case, what relief can Britain give? Ere she could hear the news, and fatal business might be done, and ourselves suffering like the wretched Britons under oppression of the conqueror. Yet that oppose independence now. Ye know not what ye do. Ye are opening a door to eternal tyranny. By keeping vacant the seat of government, there are thousands and 10,000 who would think of it, glorious to expel from the continent that barbarous and hellish power, that which hath stirred up the Indians and Negroes to destroy us. The cruelty hath a double guilt, and it is dealing brutally by us, and treacherously by them. We talk of friendship with those whom our reason forbids us to have faith, and our affection wounded through the thousand pores instructed us to detest is madness and folly. Every day wears out the little remains of kindred between us and them, and can thereby any reason to hope that as relations expire, the affection will increase, or shall agree better when we have 10 times more and greater concerns to quarrel over than ever. Ye that tell us harmony and reconciliation can restore us to the times that is past, can ye give to prostitution its former innocence? Neither can ye reconcile Britain and America. The last cord is now broken of the people of England are presenting addresses against us. There are injuries which nature cannot forgive. She would cease to be nature if she did. As will the lover forgive the ravishes of his mistress, and the continent forgive the murders of Britain. The Almighty had implanted us these unextinguishable feelings for good and wise purpose. For the guardian of his image in our hearts, they distinguish us from a herd of common animals. The social compact would dissolve and justice be extrapolated from the earth, and only casual existence where we callous to touch of affection. The robber and the murderer would often escape unpunished did not these injustices, which our tempers disdain, provoke us into justice. O ye that love mankind, ye that dare oppose, not only the tyranny, but the tyrant stand forth.
Every spot of the old world is overrun with oppression. Freedom hath been hunted around the globe. Asia and Africa have long expelled her. Europe regards her like a stranger, and England hath given her warning to depart. Oh, receive the fugitive, and repair in time an asylum for mankind. Common sense. Of the present ability of America, with some miscellaneous reflections. I have never met a man in either England or America who hath not confessed his opinion that a separation between the countries will take place one time or another. And there is no instance in which we have shewn less judgment than in endeavoring to describe what we call the ripeness or fitness of the continent for independence. As all men allow the measure and vary only in their opinions of the time, let us, in order to remove mistakes, take a general survey of things and endeavor, if possible, to find the very time. But we need not go far. The inquiry ceases at once, for the time hath found us. The general concurrence, the glorious union of all things prove that the fact. It is not in number, but in unity, that our great strength lies. Yet our present number are sufficient to repel the forces of all the world. The continent hath at this time the largest of all the world. The continent hath at this time the largest body of armed and disciplined men of any power under heaven, and is just arrived at the pitch of strength in which no single colony is able to support itself, and the whole, when united, can accomplish the matter, and either more or less than this might be fatal in its effects. Our land force is already sufficient as to naval affairs, but we cannot be insensible that Britain would never suffer an American man of war to be built. For while the continent remains in her hands, wherefore we should be no forwarder 100 years hence in that branch than we are now. But the truth is, we should be less so, because the timber of the country is every day diminished, and that which remains at last will be far off and difficult to procure. Were the continent crowded with the inhabitants, her suffering under the present circumstances would be intolerable. The more seaport towns we have, the more should we have both to defend and to lose. Our present number are so happily proportioned that our wants that no man needs to be idle. The diminution of trade affords an army, and the necessities of an army to create a new trade. Debts we have none, and whatever we may contract on this account, we shall serve a glorious memento of our virtue. Can we but leave the posterity with a settled form of government, an independent constitution of its own, the purchase at any price will be cheap. But to expend millions for the sake of getting a few vile acts repealed, and routine the present military only, is unworthy of the charge, and using posterity with utmost cruelty, because it is leaving them to do the great work to do, and a debt upon their back, from which they derive no advantage. Such a thought is unworthy a man of honor, and his true characteristics of a narrow heart and peddling politician. The debt we may collect doth not deserve our regard, if the work be but accomplished. No nation ought to be without a debt. A national debt is a national bond, and when it bears no interest, is in no case of grievance. And when it bears no interest, and when it possessed with a debt of upwards of 140 million sterlings, from which she pays upward of 4 millions interest, and as a compensation for her debt, she has a large navy. America is without a debt and without a navy. Yet for the 20th part of the English national debt could have a navy as large again. The navy of England is not worth
at this time more than 3.5 million sterlings. The first and second edition of this pamphlet were published without the following calculations, which are now given as proof of the estimation of the Navy is as just one. See Intake Naval History Intro, page 56. The charge of building a ship of each rate and furnishing her masts, yards, sails, and rigging together, the portion of 8 months boatswain and carpenter, stores a calculated by Mr. Burnett, Secretary of the Navy. And up here you can see what has been written. And hence it is easy to sum the value of cost, rather than the whole of the British Navy, in which the year 1757, when of the great glory, consisted of the following ships and guns. And here is a list of the following ships and guns. No country in the globe is so happily situated or so internally capable of riding a fleet as America. Tar, timber, iron, and cordage are her natural produce. We need go abroad for nothing, whereas the Dutch, who make large profits by hiring out their ships to the war to the Spaniards and the Portuguese, are obliged to import most of the material they use. We ought to be viewed the building of a fleet as an article of commerce. It being natural manufactory of this country, it is the best money we can lay. A navy, when finished, is worth more than it costs, and is that nice point in national policy in which commerce and the public protection are united. Let us build if we want them not. We can sell and by that means replace our paper currency with ready gold and silver. In point of mannering a fleet, people in the general run into great errors. It is not possible that 1/4 part should be sailors. The terrible privateer, Captain Death, should the hottest engagement of any ship last war. Yet had not 20 sailors on board, but her complement of men was upwards of 200. A few able and social sailors will soon ensure a sufficient number of active landsmen in the common works of a ship. Wherefore we never can be more capable to begin on maritime matters than now. While our timber is standing, our fisheries blocked up, and our sailors and shipwrights out of employ, men of war of 70 and 80 guns were built 40 years ago in New England, and why not the same now? Shipbuilding is America's great pride, in which she will in time excel the whole world. The great empires of the East are mostly inland, and consequently excluded from the possible of rivaling her. Africa is in a state of barbarism, and no power in England hath either such an extent or coast, or such an internal supply of material. Where nature hath given the one, she hath withheld the other. America only has been liberal to both. The vast empire of Russia is almost shut out of the sea. Wherefore her boundless forests, her tar, iron, cordage are only articles of commerce. In point of safety, ought we to be without a fleet? We are not the little people now, which we were 60 years ago. At the time, we might have trusted our property in the streets, or fields rather, and slept securely without locks or bolts of our doors or windows. The case now is altered, and our methods of defense ought to be improved. With our increase of property, a common pirate 12 months ago might have come up the Delaware and laid claim to the city of Philadelphia, under instant contribution of what sum he pleased. And the same might have happened to other places. Navy, any daring fellow in a brig of 14 or 16 guns might have robbed the whole continent and carries 500,000 of money. These are circumstances which demand our attention and point out the necessity of naval protection. Some perhaps will say that after we made it up with the Britain, she will protect us. Can we be so unwise as to mean that she will keep a navy in our harbor for that purpose? Common sense will tell us that the power which hath endeavored to subdue us is of all others the most improper to defend us. Conquest may be in effect under the pretense of friendship, and of ourselves after a long and brave resistance be at last cheated into slavery. And if her ships are not to be admitted into our harbors, how is she to protect us? A navy 3,000 or 4,000 miles away can be of little use, and on sudden emergencies, none at all. Wherefore, if we must hereafter protect ourselves, why not do it for ourselves? Why do it for another? The English list of ships of war is long and formidable, but not a tenth a part of them are at any one time fit for service. Numbers of them not in being, yet their names are pompously continued in the list, if only a plank be left to the ship, and not a fifth part of such are as fit for service can be spared on any situation at one time. The East and West Indies, Mediterranean, Africa, and other parts of which the British extends her claim make a large demand upon her navy. For a mixture of prejudice and inattention, we have contracted a false notion respecting the Navy of England, and talked as if we should have the whole of it encounter at once. For that reason, proposed that we must have one as large, not being instantly predictable and practical, have made use by a set of disguised Tories to discourage our beginning thereon. Nothing can be farther from the truth than this. For if America had only a 20th part of the British naval forces of Britain, she could be far an overmatch for her. As we neither have nor claim any foreign dominion, our whole force would be employed on our own coast, where we should be in the long run have 2 to 1 advantage of those who had 3,000 or 4,000 miles to sail over, before they could attack us at the same distance to return in order to refit and recruit. Although Britain by her fleet have a check over our trade to Europe, we have as large as one over her trade to the West Indies, which by laying in the neighborhood of our continent is entirely at its mercy. Some methods might be fallen on to keep up a naval force in time of peace. If we should not judge it necessary to support a constant navy, if premiums were to be given to merchants to build and employ their own services, ship mounted for the 20, 40, or 50 guns, the premium be in proportion of the loss of bulk to the merchant. 50 or 60 of those ships, with a few guard ships on constant duty, would keep up a sufficient navy, and that without burdening ourselves with the evil so loudly complained of in England, of suffering their fleet in times of peace to lie rotting in the docks. To unite the sinew of commerce and defense is sound policy, for when our strength and our riches play in each other's hands, we need fear no external enemy. In almost every article of defense, we abound. Hemp flourishes even to rankness, that we need not want cordage. Our iron is superior to that of other countries. Our small arms equal to that of any in the world. Cannon we can cast at pleasure. Saltpeter and gunpowder we are every day producing. Our knowledge is hourly improving. Resolution in our inherited character, and our courage hath never yet forsaken us. Wherefore, what is that we want?
Why is it that we hesitate? From Britain we can expect nothing but ruin. If she once admitted to the government of America again, this continent will not be worth living in. Jealousies will always be arising. Insurrections will be constantly happening. And who will quell them? Who will venture his life to reduce his own countrymen to a foreign obedience? The difference between Pennsylvania and Connecticut, respecting some unlocated lands, shew the insignificance of British government and fully proves that nothing but continental authority can regulate the continental matters. For another reason why the present time is preferable to all others is that the fewer of our numbers are, the more land there is yet unoccupied, which instead of being lavished by the king on his worthless dependents, may be hereafter applied not only to the discharge of our present debt, but to the constant support of the government. No nation under heaven has such an advantage as this. The infant state of the colonies is as called so far from being against it is an argument in favor of independence. We are sufficiently numerous, and we are more so. You might be less unified. It is a matter worthy of observation that the more a country is peopled, the smaller their armies are. In military numbers, the ancient far exceed the modern. And the reason is evident, for trade being the consequence of population. Men become too much absorbed thereby and attended to anything else. Commerce diminishes the spirit both of patriotism and military defense. The history of sufficiently informs us that the bravest achievement were always accomplished in the non-age of a nation. With the increase of commerce, England hath lost its spirit. The cities of London, notwithstanding its numbers, submit to the constant insults with patience of a coward. The more men have to lose, the less willing they are to venture. The rich are in general slaves to fear, and submit to courtly powers that are trembling duplicity of spaniel. Youth is the seed of good habits, as well as in nations as in individuals. It might be difficult, if not impossible, to form the continent into one government half a century hence. The vast variety of interests and occasions by an increase of trade and population would increase confusion. Colony would be against colony, each being able to scorn the other's insistence, while proud and foolish gloried in their distinctions. The wise would lament that the union had not been formed before. Wherefore the present time is the true time for establishing it. The intimacy from which is contracted in infancy, and the friendship for which is formed in misfortune are all of all others the most lasting and unalterable. Our present union is marked with both these characters. We are young, and we have been distressed, but our concord hath withstood our troubles, and fixes up memorable areas for posterity to glory in. The present time likewise is that a particular time which never happens to a nation but once, viz., the time of forming itself into a government. Most nations have let slip the opportunity by that means, and have compelled and received law from their conquerors, instead of making laws for themselves. First, they had a king, then form of government, where the articles of charter of government should be formed first, and men delegated to execute them afterwards. But from the errors of other nations, let us learn the wisdom, and lay hold to the present opportunity, to begin government at the right end. When William the Conqueror subdued England, he gave them laws to the point of the sword, and until we consent that the seat of government in America be legally and authoritatively occupied, we should be in danger of having it filled by some fortunate ruffian, who may treat us in the same manner. And then where will we be? Our freedom, where our property, and to religion, and to hold on to it indisputable duty of all governments to protect all conscientious professors thereof. And I know of no other business which government hath to do with.
Let a man throw aside the narrowness of soul, that selfish of principle, which the niggards and of which the nincompoops of all professions are so unwilling to part with, and he will be at once delivered of his fears. And at that head, suspicion is the companion of mean souls, and the bane of all good society. For myself, I fully consciously believe that it will be the will of the Almighty and that there should be diverse religious opinions among us, and afford the larger fields for our Christian kindness, where we all of one way of thinking our religious dispositions would want matter for probation. And on this liberal principle, it took the various denominations among us, and be like children of the same family, differing only in what is and called their Christian names. In page 33, I threw out a few thoughts on the propriety of the Continental Charter, for I only presume to offer hints, not plans. And in this place, I take the liberty of re-mentioning the subject by observing that a charter is to be understood as a bond of solemn obligation, which the whole enter into to support the right of every separate part, whether the religion, personal freedom, or property. A firm bargain and a right reckoning make long friends. In a former page, I likewise mentioned the necessity of a large equal representation, and there is no political matter which more deserves of our attention. A small number of electors and a small number of representatives may equally dangerous. But if the number of representatives be not only small but unequal, the danger is increased. As an instance of this, I mentioned the following. When the association petition was before the House of Assembly of Pennsylvania, 28 members only were present. All the Bucks County members, being 8, voted against it, and had 7 of the Chester members done the same, the whole province had been governed by 2 countries only. And this danger it is been governed by, it is always exposed to. An unwarranted stretch likewise, which that the House made their last sitting to gain undue authority over the delegates of the province, ought to warn the people at large how they trust power out to their own hands. A set of instructions for the delegates were put together, which in points of sense and business would have dishonored a few schoolboys, and a few being approved by a very few without doors, were carried into the House, and they were passed in behalf of the whole colony, whereas the whole colony know with what ill will that House hath entered. On some necessary public measures, they had not been hesitate a moment to think of the unworthiness of such a trust. Immediate necessity makes things convenient, which is, if continued, would grow into oppression. Expedience and rights are different things. We calamities of America required a consolation. There was no method so ready or at a time so proper as to appoint the person from the several houses of the assembly for that purpose, with the wisdom which they have proceeded preserved this continent from ruin. But it is more than probable that we shall never be without a Congress. Every well-wisher to good order must own that the mode of choosing members for that body deserved consideration. And I put it as a question to those who make a study of mankind whether representation and election is not too great a power for one and the same body of men to possess. When we are planning for posterity, we ought to remember the virtue is not hereditary. It is not from our enemies that we often gain excellent maxims. We are frequently surprised into reason by their mistakes. Mr. Cornwall, one of the Lords of the Treasury, treated the petition of the New York Assembly with contempt because that House, he said, consisted of but 26 members, which trifling numbers, he argued, cannot with decency be put for the whole. We thank him for his involuntary honesty. Those who fully understand of what great concept a large and equal representation is to a state should read Burke's Political Disputation.
disquisition. To conclude, however strange it may appear to some, or however unwilling they may think to make matters not, but many strong and striking reasons may be given to shew that, but nothing can settle our affairs so expeditiously as open and determined declaration of independence, some of which are, first, it is a custom of nations, when any two are at war, for some other power not engaged in quarrel, to step in as mediator and bring about preliminaries of peace. But while America calls herself a subject to Great Britain, no power, however well disposed may be, can offer her mediation. Wherefore, in our present state, we may quarrel on forever. Secondly, it is unreasonable to suppose that France or Spain will give us any kind of assistance, if we mean only to make use of that assistance for the purpose of repairing the breach and strengthening the connection between Britain and America. Either those powers would be suffered by the consequences. Thirdly, while we profess ourselves the subject of Britain, we must, in the eye of foreign nations, be considered as rebels. The precedent is somewhat dangerous to their peace. For men to be armed under the name of subjects, we, on the spot, can solve the paradox. But to unite resistance and subjection requires an idea much too refined for common understanding. Fourthly, were a manifesto to be published and dispatched to foreign courts, setting forth the miseries we have endured, and the peaceful method of the ineffectual you use for redress, declaring at the same time that not being able to any longer to live happily or safely under the cruel disposition of the British court, we had been driven to the necessity of breaking off all connections with her, at the same time assuring all such courts our peaceful disposition towards them and of our desires of entering into trade with them. Such a memorial would produce more good effects on this continent than if a ship were freighted with petitions to Britain. Under our present denomination of British subjects, we can neither be used nor heard abroad. The customs of all courts is against us, and will be so united by an independence that we rank with other nations. These proceedings may at first appear strange and difficult, but like all other steps which we may have passed over, will in little time become familiar and agreeable, and until an independence is declared, the continent will feel itself like a man who continues putting off some unpleasant business from day to day, yet knows it must be done, hates to set about it, wishes it over, and continually haunted with the thought of its necessity. That was Thomas Paine's Common Sense. If anyone's interested, they can find it here in the Juliet Hampton Morgan Memorial Library. It is found under the 320 designation of our Dewey Decimal System, specifically 320.55 Paine. I thank you for listening, and please come join us here at the library. Have a great day.